All right, folks, here we are. This is 8 ways. If you've been here before, you know we are about to talk about 8 ways to do something really good. This time, it is 8 overlooked ways for leaders to maximize profits. I am thrilled. I can't tell you how excited I am to have this conversation with Renee. Renee Fellman is a Turnaround of the Year award winner, the first woman, I think, to win Turnaround of the Year. And so that's exciting. She knows a thing or two about this. And as you're about to find out, folks, she is also a really fun conversationalist. We have joked, Renee and I, about how much we like to interrupt each other. And so, as we are about to interrupt each other for the next however many minutes that we're doing this show, folks, please understand that neither one of us thinks the other rude as we interrupt each other. It's just part of the dance of conversation. Renee, I'm so glad you're here. Thank you for being here.
I'm delighted to be here. I've been looking forward to it.
Me too. Would you please take a moment and introduce yourself?
Well, I have been a challenge junkie my entire life. After graduating from Northwestern with a degree in history, I taught eighth grade for 4 years. Trust me, if you can handle eighth graders, you can handle anything.
Ain't that the truth?
Next, at the ripe old age of 30, I was the first woman elected to the City Council of Beaverton, Oregon. 2 years later, I was elected mayor. Did not serve, however, because a charter change passed in the same election. The position to which I had been elected was abolished. I didn't want the new one, and so I ran the campaign for the first person to fill that slot. Later, when I was in my MBA program, there was a woman in the program who was living with a guy who did hospital turnarounds. And when I heard about turnarounds, I knew that's what I wanted to do. And so at this stage, I have rescued publicly held, privately held, employee-owned, family-owned, and investor-owned companies in a wide variety of industries from the brink of disaster. I've been interim CEO for 20 companies and an outside consultant to 21. That's my story.
That is a lot of wow. And so, folks, you know, this is clearly someone to listen to. Whether you're here because you want to turn around your profits from good to great or from slipping to accelerating, I am certain I'm about to learn a lot. So I'm not going to take notes just so that I can stay here. But I may go back and listen to this again and take notes on what Renee is about to share with us. Renee, it is time for your first suggestion about how leaders can maximize profits. I know this is going to be one of those overlooked ways.
Yes. Number one for me is base hiring decisions on results rather than experience. And here's a quick story that will illustrate my point. I went to meet with a potential client, and the CEO was describing to me all the problems that they'd been having. And he said, but one great thing we've done, he said, is we have a new CFO and he has experience with troubled companies. Oh, I said, that's great. Tell me about him. Well, he was CFO at company A and they were in trouble. I said, how are they doing? Oh, he said, they're not in business anymore. I said, and then? Oh, and then he went to company B. He was CFO at company B and they were in trouble. I said, well, how are they doing? And they had gone out of business. So as you might imagine, he was one of the first people I ended up replacing. But the point is, when you're posting a job, whether it's a managerial job, whatever job, you may be listing experience required or desired. But when it comes down to making that hiring decision, it's absolutely critical to make that decision based on the person's results.
I think that's so important. I think you're absolutely right that it is overlooked. And I'm reminded of John Oliver has this show called I think it's called This Week Tonight, right? And not that long ago, I think he was talking about all of these surgeons who are moving from state to state as the malpractice suits pile up, right? These are clearly surgeons who have a lot of experience, not one whose knife I want to go under.
Exactly.
I think that's really valuable. Really valuable. You know, it's these small shifts of degree that make such a big difference. I'm curious, Renee, do you mean don't hire people who have failed, or do you mean rather maybe if they've got failures, what have they learned from them, and have they managed to turn that learning into future success?
The answer is it depends. So I've done at this stage, I've done an awful lot of hiring. And so to the extent that I can, I do my very best to find out what have people actually done? What kinds of situations were they in? What were the goals? What did they accomplish? And I don't expect people to be perfect. I do expect them to be effective and forthright when they tell me about what's happened.
Yeah, forthright is really important, because if people are hiding stuff, and they do, then you're going to end up surprised by hurt. I can't count the number of companies that I've been in where they, maybe they bring us in specifically because one particular leader left, and then I call it the cockroaches under the refrigerator, right? Now you've got this gap. And so all of the cockroaches emerge, and now you can see them. The leader has been doing something to hide the problems while they've been there. Eventually, the trouble that they've been either causing or permitting reaches the point where they either leave of their own volition because they are ashamed, or they are fired, and then you really discover what's under the fridge.
I'm actually going to be talking a little bit about that in my second point.
All right. Well, let's clear the way for your second point by giving the folks my first suggestion. My first suggestion is that leaders substitute compassion for empathy and impatience, because there is conventional wisdom out there that says that as a leader, you've got to be impatient. You really, you got to drive, and it's an asset to be impatient. There's a conventional wisdom out there that says you've got to have empathy. Whatever it is, you want to be soft-hearted, and I think, the distinction that I'm making between empathy and compassion is, I understand you. Soft on people, hard on problems, as somebody put it. Soft on people, hard on results. I love you, and I need you to do different. I need you to do better. We need to get better results. That is compassion. Compassion is not simply empathy alone. I can understand where you're coming from, and I care for you. I understand where you're coming from. I care for you, and I'm not going to allow you to argue for your limitations. That's my first suggestion.
Obviously, I agree with you, because what are we really after? Results, right?
That's right. And if you allow people, our brains are wired for economy, right? They use, I forget, it's like 7% of our body weight or less, and it uses 20% of our calories. And so we have evolved to, if we can, kind of let our brains coast. And so we are wired to coast. It's one of the reasons that high performing people love to be around other high performing people, is that it helps us overcome that predilection for lethargy, that predilection for coasting. And so if you let people coast, they will, and not because there's anything wrong with them, but because that's what our brains tell us to do.
I'm restraining myself because I agree with you. I just think the point that it's a separate point, but good people want to work with other really good people. And if you've got a company of poor performers, it's going to be really hard to keep good people. So that's what I was thinking as you were talking.
Very, very true. All right. Renee, what is your second suggestion for the good folks?
My second overlooked way to maximize profits is what I consider the most important thing I'm going to be telling you today. So important that I purposely made it the second one because I know some people arrive late or have to leave early. So here it is. It is absolutely critical for every company and at every level of the company to take time to think through what are the key functions that must be done. Is each of those functions actually included in a specific job description? And if so, is the person filling that position competent? And the reason that I'm stressing this is in every one, this has not been done in every one of my client companies, and one of the reasons that they've had problems. Here are a couple of examples. So Aaron mentioned that I won the turnaround of the year for PML Microbiologicals, the publicly held third largest supplier of culture media in North America. For those of you who don't know what culture media is, if you took biology, you may remember agar in a petri dish, or you've been to a lab and somebody swabbed your throat and then plunked it into the culture media.
You've just created an olfactory memory for me. That agar smell is unmistakable.
So in the case of PML had many problems, but one of them was that when their culture media, when those petri dishes got to the medical labs, bacteria was already growing in them. This was a serious problem. It meant that their revenues were declining because labs needed not contaminated culture media, and it was increasing their costs because they had to remake and reship a lot of this. So there were several problems that contribute to this. One of them was that the company, which was FDA regulated, did not, in fact, was out of compliance with some FDA regulations. So one of the first things I did was to sit down with the Director of Governmental Affairs and the Director of Quality Assurance, and I asked, which one of you is responsible for FDA compliance? Which one do you think was responsible? If you said neither one, you would be right. PML had not included FDA responsible for FDA compliance in any job description.
Wow.
And
you're reminding me. Go ahead, please. Yeah. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. See, we already showed that we interrupt. Go ahead.
You're reminding me of, I think the expression is, if everyone is responsible, no one is responsible.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Go ahead.
No, you.
We're bad. Another example would be I had full operating authority over 5 interrelated companies. 4 of them made stuff. One was an administrative arm. The problem with these companies was no one had assigned responsibility for technology recommendations and decisions. No one was assigned in each of the 5 companies. No one was assigned that for the companies, these interrelated companies as a whole. So what had happened was that the CFO, who was very bright, hardworking, but operationally weak, decided correctly that the companies really needed an ERP system, an enterprise resource planning system. And he was right that they needed it. but it had been very badly implemented. Different, they didn't all have the same modules. Some of the modules didn't work. I'll spare you the details. Here's one that's really easy to understand. So these companies sometimes had the same customer. So let's say that a customer placed an order with company one, and they didn't pay company one, so they were put on credit hold. Okay, now they call company three to place an order. Does the ERP system give company three any way to see that that customer is a customer of one of the other companies? No. Can they see that the customer is on credit hold? No, because no competent person was responsible for technology decisions. Now, in this case, this was an easy fix. I wish they were all this easy. Someone in the IT department created what I called the magic report, so that now if a customer would call, the person could go to their computer, say, aha, look up the customer, see the customer was on credit hold, and say, we'll be happy to take your order, but that'll be cash in advance, please. So again, it is extremely important at all levels of the organization for managers to ask, what are the key functions? Are they in somebody's job description? And is that person competent?
Your story about the credit also reminds me of a recent conversation that I had with a CEO about that in his interrelated companies, they're not doing the cross-selling that could be possible. And so who's responsible for looking for those opportunities? If it's not you, right, then it's nobody. There's got to be, when I used to train people in CPR and first aid, right? And one of the things that you learn, if you are the first responder, you don't say somebody call 911, you say you call 911.
That's right. It's exactly right.
I love it. Assign all key functions. And so it's critical then also to identify what are the key functions. And that's a harder task than it might first appear. Of course, we know all our key functions. Well, have you listed them? Have you recognized if there are any key functions that might be slipping through the cracks that you didn't initially put on your list?
Yeah, for those of you watching, before we started, Aaron said, "Oh, we'll probably have different views because the services we provide are somewhat different." I said, "I think you're going to be surprised. I think we're going to be very much on the same track."
Oh, I definitely expected to be on the same track, and I think that we're coming through different lenses, which is a great opportunity then for me to make my second suggestion. You folks at home can see if you can figure out our different lenses here. My second suggestion is give people more than they can handle. Not a whole lot more than they can handle. Give people more than they can handle. And there are a few reasons for this. One of them is we've already talked about is your brain is wired, and your employees' brains, they're all wired to coast if you can. And so when I've got more than I can handle, I suddenly find I'm capable of handling more than I may have initially thought. So that's a benefit, is now I recognize that my limits are actually greater than I thought they were. And by exercising harder, I grow those limits so that I'm even less limited tomorrow than I was today. And then also, you're never going to find out what your people's limits are unless you reach them. It is by reaching our limits that we figure out what our limits are. And so I actually told a few of the folks on my team yesterday, my job is to give you more than you can handle. And then also, of course, you've got to encourage people to tell you when they have reached those limits so that you can make decisions about priorities. And I'll tell you a story, Renee, about when I first learned how important this was. Is in my first job after college, I got in trouble for doing crosswords at my desk. And this was probably half a year, maybe even a whole year into my employment in this company. And I had said to my supervisor, I need more. I am there. I do not have enough. I need more. And she would give me a little more. And I'd say, no, you don't understand. I need more. And she would give me a little bit more. Now, what I would do is I would get up from my desk and I'd go to my colleagues and I'd say, I've got spare time. How can I help? At that point, it wasn't even that I was unwilling to do it. I just didn't have the insight that that was even a possibility. So I was bored, and I would let things pile up on my desk. Meanwhile, I'd entertain myself some other way, and I'd let things pile up on my desk so that I could then hustle through them. Folks, you don't want to let, kind of a racehorse like me be idle, because we will leave. And you won't get from us what you could in the meantime.
I'm sorry. This is sort of not related, but relevant. Someone I know who does the same thing I do once said, all A players are a pain in the ass. Sorry.
No, the folks who watch this regularly know I have a major potty mouth, and ass is not the least of the things that these folks have heard. So say more about A players are a pain in the ass.
Well, personally, I always want A players, and I'm actually going to talk about this in my next point, but you want people who are going to say what they think, who are going to know. I want people who know things I don't know, who will tell me if I'm wrong, and who will have other ideas and take the initiative.
That reminds me of something that I remember reading about. They called it the Chrome Firefox effect. Chrome and Firefox are both web browsers. Right. They're not the ones that are pre-installed on Macs, and they're not pre-installed on your PC. Turns out that if you do a survey across all of the employees around the country, those who use Chrome and Firefox are more productive, more effective than those who use the pre-installed
interesting
browsers. Now, the obvious and wrong interpretation of this is that Chrome and Firefox make them more effective. In fact, the reason that they are more effective and more productive is the same reason as that they have selected a different browser. People who are effective, people who are productive, don't accept the status quo. And so it's the fact that they don't accept the status quo that makes them more effective, and it's a correlation, not a causation.
Interesting.
All right. It's time, Renee, for your, I think we're up to your third suggestion.
My next one is right on point with what we've been talking about. My overlooked way to maximize profits is to let employees know that candor is welcome and encouraged. And it's exactly what we've been talking about. When people ask me what I do when I go into a client, I go through, I do blah, blah, blah. I said, but I use the consultant's secret. The employees will tell you. It's the people in the company who are aware of the problems, who have ideas about how things can be better, who see the problems, and it is just critical for achieving best performance to be sure that people will come to you if there's an issue. One of the things as a leader, if you want people to be open with you, you have to know in your heart that you are not in fact perfect, and that you might actually make a mistake. You might actually not know everything. And you have to let people know that. If someone comes to you with a problem right away and says, Renee, I've got to tell you about this right away. We were doing blah, 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 and this happened. And you've got a capable, conscientious employee, then it's thank you for letting me know about this. What can we do to fix this now? What can we do to, so it doesn't happen again?
That thank you is so important, because very often I'm talking to leaders who say, yeah, I tell people that I want them to criticize me, I want them to disagree with me, I want them to have this candor that you're talking about. And then I talk to the people who have heard that, and they say, oh yeah, that's what he says, it's not what he wants. And so you got to be careful that you're not only letting people know that candor is welcome, you've got to prove it.
Absolutely. And one of the ways I know I was successful in one company, we had just 8 of us had sat down at a meeting, and I looked at one of my favorite managers. I said, Dale, are you okay? And he said, I'm really not. He said, I've got a headache. Oh, I said, Dale, you've got to be like me. I emote. I don't get headaches. He said, I know you don't get headaches. You give headaches. And everybody laughed. That was when I knew that I'd been successful in letting people know they could say what they really think. To me, having that kind of an environment where people really can be truthful and constructive with each other is really super important.
Yeah. Don't shoot the messenger. And when people will come to you, they'll point out problems. They'll say, this is the wrong way to be doing it. And sometimes they're going to be wrong. Even, and maybe even especially in those circumstances, it's important to say, thank you. I appreciate your bringing your perspective. And with compassion, explain what your position is and why it is that, and then hear back, right? This is a dialogue that if you want this candor to be and persist, then you've got to reward it, regardless of its initial small scale value.
Yeah, the point that you made is really an important one. Encouraging candor and openness doesn't mean that you have to agree with everyone or do what everyone else thinks you should do. That is an important point.
All right. My third suggestion for the folks is create jobs for your misfit rock stars. And this may depend a little bit potentially on the size of your company, whether you've got enough cash flow to allow this. There is conventional wisdom out there that says that you don't shape the job for the person. The job is, and you've got to find the person to fit it. And there is some wisdom in that. And it's also a way that you can lose some real value in your company. And so if you have somebody who you believe could create value for your company and there isn't a place for them to fit, then conceivably you might want to find a place that they could fit. It's your rock stars who could perhaps create the next service line. It's your rock stars who don't fit, who could potentially help you innovate and stay ahead of your competition. Valuable people are not a dime a dozen. And so if you've got them, you want to hang on to them. And one quick story, doesn't quite fit the misfit, but the famous chef Mario Batali, a restaurant in New York. That's all he wanted. He just wanted a restaurant in New York. And one day he woke up and thought, my valuable, awesome sous chef has learned all that he can from me. And any day now, he's either going to go start his own restaurant or he's going to go work for some other chef who can teach him something. So Mario Batali bought a second restaurant, gave the guy 50% equity and said, this is yours. You go. And now that guy is the chef of this new restaurant. And Mario Batali now has 50% ownership in this totally new asset that then also took off. What are your thoughts?
No, I absolutely agree. Another thing is you may have someone in a position, but they could make a greater contribution in a different position. Mm-hmm. It's that company with the 5 interrelated companies. there was a young fellow there. He was right out of college. He was probably 22 years old. And this company had so many problems, and I needed somebody to do special projects. And I put him in charge of special projects, and he was incredible. P.S. This guy is now head of quality assurance for Bob's Red Mill. So when you've got somebody who's got capabilities, put them to use. Sort of goes with your, what's your highest and best use? Use their talents.
There is somebody whom I fired from my company. There are only just a small handful of us on payroll at the time. I fired him from my company because the role that we had for him was not a role that he was well suited to. And I remember saying to him, I am going to be on the lookout for the moment when it makes sense to bring you back to fill a completely different role that our company has no need for right now and no space for. But watch out for what value could you get from these misfit rock stars. All right. Renee, before we move on to your fourth and final suggestion, how and why might people get a hold of you?
My highest and best use is improving profitability at warp speed. I have, in one company, I led the team from negative 27% profit to positive 4.4 within 12 months. At a commercial printer, we improved on-time deliveries from 50% on time to 98% on time within 5 months. The 5 companies that I told you about, I was there for 6 months. In those 6 months, total operating profit improved by 350%. So that is definitely when to call me is when a company wants to improve profitability quickly. When I only accept one major project at a time to ensure that my clients have both the expertise and the attention they require. When I have a client that is with headquarters outside of the Portland, Oregon metro area, I relocate to the headquarters location for project duration and do not commute back and forth weekly. Serious business.
And if you refer back, folks, to Renee's first suggestion, don't hire for experience, hire for results. Well, that is an excellent recommendation for you, Renee.
Thank you.
Yeah. What is your fourth and final, maybe final suggestion how to
many, as you might imagine, but for this purpose,
how to maximize profits, right? Yeah.
One of the things is, I don't know if any of you watch NCIS, Gibbs has rules. Well, Renee has rules. And one of my rules is 2 sick companies do not make a healthy one. Mm. Many companies, as a part of their strategy to increase the value of their companies, is to acquire other companies. If one of those targets is a troubled company, you need to see flashing orange, maybe flashing red lights. I have had 3 clients that came to me as a result of these kinds of acquisitions. One was had been an incredibly well-run retail operation that had acquired an incredibly troubled different retail operation. And by the time they called me, I said, you're going to need to liquidate. And ultimately, that's what happened. PML, my turnaround of the year, and another company where I was involved, they had problems and they thought, our profits are down, but if we acquire another troubled company that's also losing money and having trouble, our bottom line will improve. Wrong. It got worse. They were a disaster. 2 sick companies simply do not make a healthy one. Part of the issue is that, first of all, mergers and acquisitions, as everybody knows, can be a problem anyway. But when they're in trouble, the skill set required for running that kind of a company and fixing that kind of company are significantly different from the skills needed to run a really well-run, to lead a healthy company. So two sick companies do not make a healthy one.
I'm going to ask you a question that I imagine I know the answer to. If you find that your own company is starting to ail, would buying a well-run, healthy company cure your ills?
No.
I thought you were going to say that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
If you don't have a competent leader, it's a real problem. And I could editorialize about what is a competent leader also.
All right.
Yeah.
Renee, thank you for that. My fourth and final suggestion will come right after this. You might think about reaching out to me, Aaron Schmuckler at the S-Works. If, like a leader that I spoke to recently said, I learned we had a toxic culture. And what a statement of humility it was for him to say that. He told me that he didn't realize that people didn't have the same endurance and the same capacity and tolerance for sacrifice that he had. And so he'd been treating everybody in his company as if they were him. And it had led to this what he called, his words, toxic culture. If that's happening for you, we'd love to talk with you. We've got suggestions that we could make, and maybe you would want to work with us. We worked with another company recently where the CEO said, we have a problem with trust. We are walking on eggshells around each other. And speaking of the candor, Renee, that you suggested earlier, he said, we're walking around on eggshells around each other. And after we'd worked with them for one day, just after the first day, he said, we are now telling each other what we need to hear. So that was just the beginning. If you're looking to stop walking on eggshells together and instead tell each other what you'd like to hear, you might want to reach out to me. I'm the only Aaron Schmuckler on LinkedIn, and you can find me at thesworks.com. Yeah, go ahead, Renee.
While we're talking about where you can reach me, if you want to get in touch with me, you can find me on LinkedIn. The last name is Fellman. There are two of us. I'm not the nurse.
Yes. All right.
Yeah, go ahead.
My fourth and final suggestion for you is like the CEO that I just described, who said we had a toxic culture. Face and address the reality of your culture. And I remember working with the president of an insurance company who came to us because he wanted to, during COVID, he said, we've got to get back to the culture we had before COVID. And when we met face to face at one point, and he slid a packet of papers across the desk to me, and he said, this is our culture. The truth, Renee, you're chuckling, and so I imagine you recognize the same truth that I recognize. Your culture is not what you say it is. Your culture is how people behave. Your culture, I forget, I looked it up once, and I've found this quote attributed to so many different people that I can't tell you what its actual origin is. Your culture is defined by the worst behaviors you tolerate. And so if you wonder, what are the worst behaviors that we tolerate? Saying to somebody, don't keep doing that, and then there are no consequences if they keep doing that, that's tolerating that behavior. So think about, what are the things that are happening in your company that you wish weren't happening in your company, and they've been happening for days or weeks or months or years. Those behaviors define your culture. And so face and address the reality of what your culture really is. It's not what you wrote. Seth is asking, what are some good ways to measure the health of your culture? Do you have any thoughts about that, Renee?
I'm smiling because, of course, another one of my rules, which is a common rule, not just mine, is what gets measured is what gets done. And
yes.
There are, it's actually, I think, a tough question to answer. You know, I told you my story. From one of the things about my world is it's different from most. When I go into a company, they have no time. It's like I'm a doctor and they're in the emergency room. And so everything is absolutely critical and everything is measured. We literally together establish what is going to happen, who's going to do it, when are they going to do it, and what will the result be. And everything is measured by results. And the culture in a turnaround, to some extent, may be a little bit different because there's no wiggle room. You may be in a better position, Aaron, to answer that question for companies that aren't in crisis.
I love this question, and I could go on forever about it. So I'll try to be at least a little bit brief. One, what are the behaviors, as I've talked about a moment ago? What are the behaviors, the worst behaviors that you tolerate in your culture? That's a good measure. What gets rewarded? And rewarded is sometimes is monetary, sometimes it's about promotion, sometimes it's just about what are the stories that you tell. That, hey, I want to tell you everybody about what just happened yesterday with Renee. I'm telling you this story because I love what Renee did. That is also a reward, and it's the kind of story that perpetuates culture. A quick story. Last week, I think it was last week, earlier this week, sometime very recently, I just happened to be in the restaurant in Seattle called Canlis. If you're not familiar with Canlis, folks, this is the restaurant in Seattle where if you want to take your wife out to dinner, be prepared to spend $500 to $800 for the two of you to have dinner. This is the restaurant that I happen to be in, not for dinner. I was there before the restaurant opened, and I had the great grace of being able to sit with Brian Canlis, who owned the place. And he told me about the poem. What is the poem that inspires our service at Canlis? And it's the poem that is printed at the foot of the Statue of Liberty. Give us your huddled masses yearning to be free.
Really?
What has that got to do, I wondered, with, fine dining at the highest level? And so I asked him, well, tell me about that. I'm so intrigued. And he said, whoever you are, if you feel in any way like you don't belong here, we have messed up. He said, our valets know that if you come in a 1982 beat up, dusty Honda Civic with a dirty dog in the back seat, you are just as welcome as anybody else here. And you should feel that immediately. And by the way, I did. When I walked into this restaurant uninvited, when it was closed, I was immediately, once they saw that I was there, greeted with warmth, given directions to meet the guy I was there to meet, who was somebody who was doing work for the restaurant, with graciousness and kindness. And when I accidentally dumped over a centerpiece decoration, dropping pebbles and moss and candle all over the floor, creating more work for people, they were warm and made my embarrassment immediately evaporate. It was like an immune response. People came from various different directions to help, and all of a sudden a broom appeared, though it wasn't clear to me that there was any communication. This is culture is behavior. And so these behaviors of, more work created by a guy who doesn't even really belong here, no problem. You are welcome here. That is a measure of culture.
One of the interesting things to me is I know that restaurant. It has been there a long time. I suspect that the Canlis you met is not the founder. Am I
No,
right?
he is the son of the founder.
Think of what that says
Yes.
about the culture of that family.
Yeah.
That's remarkable.
And he said also, he pointed to the table next to us and said, the other day, Bill Gates was sitting here. And at the table right next to him was a couple who had never been able to afford to eat here and would never be able to afford to eat here again. Those are the folks that we love to serve.
Wow. That's really remarkable. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Anything that you'd like to say before we ring off, Renee?
Well, no, mostly thank you for inviting me. It's been delightful, as I knew it would be. And
I'm so glad we had
that my insights have been helpful.
They have been helpful to me. It's been very, enlightening for me. I enjoyed our time together, as I always do. And I'll be looking you up next time I come to Portland.
Excellent.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us for yet another episode of 8 Ways To, this time 8 Overlooked Ways. And so I hope that you have encountered some valuable surprises here. I know that Renee would be happy to talk with you further if you've got any questions about any of her insights. I would be happy to talk to you further as well if you've got any questions about any of the insights that I shared. And I hope you all have a wonderful and profitable Q2.